Hello, everyone. It's April 29th, 2021, and you're listening to the Fights We Love podcast. I'm your host, Alex O, and today we're going to be doing a film study on the rematch between Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal at UFC 261. In this episode, we'll talk a little bit about the MMA news from this week. We'll take a look at the state of the welterweight division and talk about how this fight impacts the rest of the title picture. And in the main event, we'll do a round-by-round analysis of the fight. I am still kind of buzzing over this past weekend of fights. That card was just absolutely awesome. And the crowds being back definitely gave the card some energy. Some energy that we were really missing from these closed off events in these quiet arenas. Not to say that those fights weren't fun, but the crowd being back definitely adds something to the fight. And I also loved seeing the fights play out in the big cage again compared to the smaller cage that we've been seeing at the UFC Apex facility in Vegas. So great night of fights, and it's one of those nights of fights where when people ask me what it is I love about MMA, that's a card I can point to. UFC 261 has a lot of fights that I can talk about and show why I appreciate the sport. So I'm really excited to go over the film today. There's lots of stuff to go over and a lot of stuff to get into. So strap in. It's going to be a fun one, and let's get to it. So, what happened this week? Well, to start off, TJ Dillashaw got a nasty cut over his right eye, and he's possibly out of his fight with Corey Sandhagen on May 8th. So, it's likely they're going to postpone that fight, and I'm devastated over that. That's one of my most anticipated fights of the year, and really bummed to see that one get pushed off. But this is MMA, so things happen in training. So best we could do, just hope TJ recovers quickly and recovers okay and heals up that cut, and then they can get back in there. But I don't think they're going to try to find a short notice replacement for Corey, especially because this is a number one contender fight. So push it off and then try to get that back in there as soon as possible. Chris Weidman, he looks like he's recovering well after the broken leg he suffered against Uriah Hall. So, honestly, that was the one tough part of the night from this past weekend's fights. It's just truly crazy to think about what happened there with Weidman breaking his leg on a leg kick like that. So, I'm still kind of shook over that, but it's good to see that he is recovering well. He's with his family. He's posting on Instagram and on social media. So really do wish him a speedy recovery, and I'm glad to see that things went okay with his surgery. Francis Ngannou, he got to take the heavyweight belt back home to Cameroon, and he received an awesome hero's welcome. So I highly recommend going on his Instagram and checking out his post where he talks about being able to bring that belt back home and how he's always wanted to do that. It's really a great story there, and you really love to see stuff like that. And then some other random stuff. It looks like Conor McGregor and Kamaru Usman are going back and forth on Twitter. So that's interesting. At this point, I think Conor McGregor is willing to fight just about anybody. So that's never changed about him. Now, moving on, let's talk about the state of the division. So we have the champion Kamaru Usman, who just defeated Jorge Masvidal in a rematch for the UFC Welterweight Championship. At number 1, we have Colby Covington. He last beat Tyron Woodley. So Dana White has said that Colby Covington should be next for the title shot. Ranked at number 2, that's Gilbert Burns, and he's expected to face the 5th-ranked Stephen Wonderboy Thompson next. So they just announced that fight this week. At number 3 in the division, we have Leon Edwards. He's expecting to face, he will be facing Nate Diaz at UFC 262. So Nate Diaz, he's not currently ranked. He's a little bit of an outlier in both the lightweight and welterweight divisions. He's unranked in both, but he just kind of he fights when he wants, and he'll take the fights he wants. Now at number 4, we have Jorge Masvidal. He's probably going to slip a bit in the rankings after this performance, and it's back to the drawing board. So he's going to take some time to recover, and we'll see what he wants to do next. But there are plenty of compelling matchups for him in the top 5 after he recovers. And then at number 5, we mentioned Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He's fighting Gilbert Burns next. He looks to be about 1 to 2 fights away from the title shot, depending on if he can win impressively against Gilbert Burns. And at number 6, we have Vicente Luque, and he just beat Tyron Woodley, and he won by a finish, and he's now 3 wins in a row with 3 finishes, so cracking into that top 5. And the top 5 is highly competitive, and the title picture actually looks pretty straightforward to me. Colby is the clear number 1 contender here, and it's kind of a no-brainer to remake that fight. It was a very close first fight, even though Usman finished the fight. I think a lot of people would still want to see that rematch, and it's a compelling rematch. And for Usman, I do want to take a moment and appreciate just how active he's been in the last year. He's now had 3 title fights within a year of each other, and that's very difficult to do. It's hard on your body because you're going fight camp to fight camp to fight camp, but also you don't see that as often with champions anymore. You don't really see a lot of active champions, I think. And there was a period there between like 2015 to 2018 where it seemed like divisions were getting held up by champions because they were waiting for these big fights to happen. Now we have Usman, and he's coming in and he's fighting all the number 1 contenders back to back to back, and it's just really refreshing, and it's a breath of fresh air to see him constantly take these fights. So I really love to see that in an active champion, and yeah, we'll see where he goes next from here. But it looks like Colby is next for that fight. The Leon Edwards-Nate Diaz fight, that's an interesting one. So a win for Edwards there would definitely get him next in line for the title shot. But if Nate were to win, it would be weird to see Nate in the title shot next without finding another contender. As I said, he's a little bit of an outlier. So he's not in the rankings, but anyone he fights will be a top 5 fighter. So we don't really know what's going to happen if Nate wins that fight. Win or lose, I think his next fight is just whichever fighter presents the biggest opportunity, whether that there's a belt there or not. There's still the trilogy fight with Conor McGregor on the horizon. They can do a rematch with Masvidal for the BMF title again. I mean, there's always compelling matchups for Nate Diaz. You just have to wait until a fighter comes along that interests him for a fight. And Leon Edwards, if he's taking this Leon Edwards fight, he has a plan for the fight after that. He often comes back to take one fight so that he can win that fight and set up a bigger fight next. So if he wins there, you can expect him to get on the mic and, cut a promo and call out the next fighter, a big one. So I think we all want to see the McGregor-Diaz trilogy fight, though. Gilbert Burns and Wonderboy, that's a great matchup. I think whoever wins that still is about a win away. Like Gilbert Burns just got his title shot. And Wonderboy, he's making his run for it. So I think both of them about one more win after this fight, and we'll see. That's what's interesting to me about the welterweight title picture, though. It seems like everybody in the top 5 is, one good win away from a title shot. And meanwhile, like I was saying, we have Vicente Luque. He's ready to crack into the top 5, and he's making a run at the title right now. So he comes into the top 5 and instantly matches up really well with everybody there. So with him coming in, we have Diaz and Masvidal both being the big draws, the big money fights in the division. We could see some really crazy matchups there. So personally, I still want to see Leon Edwards and Masvidal fight it out after they had their infamous altercation backstage where Masvidal gave him the 3-piece with the soda. And Luque, I think I would like to see him versus the loser of Gilbert Burns and Wonderboy Thompson, and that again gives him another opportunity to shoot himself into the title picture. So all kinds of good stuff going on at the top of the division. And that brings us to our main event of the episode. And whew, what a fight. I mean, great fight, but even greater finish. And that's instantly one of my favorite knockouts I think I've ever seen. I was just losing my mind as it happened. And just there's so much to unpack here. And the big takeaway is that Kamaru Usman is getting more dangerous as a champion. He's more dangerous now than in the previous 10 fights before he became a champion. And going into this fight, I was expecting to see something pretty similar to the first fight. I expected Masvidal to find more success landing strikes since he would have a better gas tank this time. And I thought Masvidal would be able to land some good shots as they broke the clinch and that his combinations would be sharper this time around. And Kamaru Usman, he just came in and blew all of that away. And he didn't even have to use his grappling to dominate the fight. Now, before we get into the fight, one of the key factors that I think gave Usman a big advantage in this rematch was his ability to control where the fight takes place. Now, coming into this rematch, having dominated the first fight with his grappling, Usman had a significant edge in dictating where exactly the fight plays out. He got to control whether the fight was against the fence, whether it was against on the mat or on the feet, because of how good his wrestling was in the first fight. And he comes into this rematch with that. So with that in mind, it shouldn't really be a surprise that he was able to outstrike Masvidal in this rematch. But it still was to me, because I think I gave the edge in striking to Masvidal, but I should have known better because of how good Usman's striking has looked in his previous 3 fights. But anyways, time and time again throughout MMA history, what we've seen is different grapplers outstriking better strikers on the feet because of the threat of the takedown. The threat of the takedown changes the dynamic of the fight significantly. When you look at Khabib versus Conor McGregor and how Khabib knocked Conor McGregor down, he's the first fighter in the UFC to knock him down. And it's because McGregor was hesitating and thinking about the takedown. So Khabib fakes a shot and comes over the top of the right hand, and he caught McGregor clean. You look at Randy Couture versus Chuck Liddell, their first fight. Randy Couture was the one outstriking Chuck Liddell because he was also leading grappling exchanges. When you look back over George St. Pierre's history of fights, pretty much every strong striker that he came up against, GSP dominated them both in the striking and in the grappling. And it's because he would grapple when they wanted to strike and then strike when they were worried about grappling. So when you put your opponent on alert for the takedown, that creates openings for your strikes to land. So this fight, this rematch between Usman and Masvidal, has now become another classic example of that concept. So let's get into the fight. In round 1, in the first 30 seconds of this fight, I think tells a really, really interesting story. We see at 450, we see Usman look for a jab while Masvidal tries a front kick, and then a few seconds later, Usman jabs again while Masvidal's throwing a low kick. So right off the bat, Usman's getting to work. He's trying to dial his jab in, and he's looking to land specifically when Masvidal tries to kick. And that's a common thing we see with Usman and his jab. He likes to land that jab as you're stepping in with a kick. After those early exchanges, we see Usman starting to lay the groundwork with his feints after he's countering these kicks. So what he's trying to do with his feints, he's doing 2 things. He's jab stepping and he's level changing. So when you jab step, it's like in basketball, you fake your lead foot forward like you're stepping forward, but you don't fully commit. So you jab step and you move away or you move around. And then you're level changing. He's faking a takedown. So he ducks down, steps forward, and pretends like he's going for a takedown. And what that does is the jab step makes you think he's entering, and the level change, it changes the way you strike because you have to be aware of the takedown now. And it for fighters, it actually makes them kind of bring their hips back. Because when somebody shoots a takedown on you, you want to separate the hips and keep your hips back so that you can sprawl properly. So hips being back means you're not able to commit to your counter punches. So we see Usman get to work right away with these jab steps and these level changes, and Masvidal starts biting on the feints almost immediately. At 4:41 of the first round, Usman level changes to fake a shot. Masvidal reacts with a low kick, misses. At 4:33, Usman jab steps and Masvidal tries a front kick, misses. At 4:29, Usman level changes again and Masvidal reacts with a check left hook. So in just the first 30 seconds, Usman has established his jab as a counter to Masvidal's kicks. He's established a takedown threat with 2 level changes, and he's established control of the distance with his jab steps. You see, he's standing out of range, jab stepping in, and making Masvidal think he's coming in, and Masvidal swings a counter and misses. So all of Masvidal's counters are missing now. And as a result of this, we see a much different first round in this rematch than we did in the first match between them two. So the most noticeable difference between Masvidal's performance in the first fight with Usman and his performance in this fight was his ability to lead exchanges. When Usman and Masvidal fought for the first time, Masvidal was the one. He came out as the aggressor. He led exchanges with low kicks, with body kicks, with boxing combinations. And as a result, Usman had to counter with a takedown. He landed takedowns, and Masvidal was able to get back to his feet. But when he got back to his feet, he would continue to lead and try to land damaging shots early on. Now, Masvidal had a much smaller gas tank because he took that first fight on short notice, so he had to kind of come out and try to go for the finish early on. This fight, it's a little bit of a different story because he comes in and you can tell he's trying to be a little bit more efficient with his energy. He's expecting a longer fight, and he's prepared to go 5 rounds. But on top of that, Usman is kind of making him hesitate, and because he's making Masvidal hesitate because with his feints, Masvidal is no longer leading exchanges. And as I was watching the first round go on, I was thinking that something kind of looked off with Masvidal's hands and the way that he was throwing his punches, because there wasn't the kind of like power and fluidity that I was used to seeing in his punches. And to me, there was a noticeable difference in power between him and Usman. And that's because instead of attacking, Masvidal was reacting. Rather than stepping in and throwing with power, he was trying to counter without overcommitting. If you don't overcommit, you can keep your hips back, and if your hips are back, you're ready to fight off the takedown. That's not to say that counter-striking isn't a viable strategy, but against Kamaru Usman, who's showing tons of activity with his feints, counter-striking becomes significantly harder. So then at 4:23, Usman steps in, and he steps in with a jab to the body. So let's take stock again real quick. We have the jab step, where Usman is using these short steps forward to feint an entrance into the exchange. We have the level change, where Usman ducks down and fakes a shot to the takedown. And now we're adding the body jab on top of that, which mixes the jab step and the level change together nicely. And all 3 things look the same. It's a forward step into the exchange. And when we reviewed the Usman-Gilbert Burns fight, his previous fight, we talked about sensory overload and how Usman's movement and his feints can kind of have an overwhelming effect on his opponent because it's a lot to keep track of. And now it's the same thing here, because now you have to be prepared to defend on 2 different levels, and you don't know if he's looking to strike or grapple. And he's striking both up top and to your body. And it hasn't even been a minute yet. So that's what I mean by Kamaru Usman. He's showing you so many different looks in a short amount of time, and you better be well prepared for that, and you better be thinking 1 to 2 steps ahead of each of his feints. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind and you're going to pay for it. So moving on, we see Masvidal move around, and he's still biting on Usman's feints almost every time. We get to 4 minutes and 3 seconds, and Masvidal, he's standing orthodox. He throws a right low kick. Now Usman defends, and then after he checks the kick, he steps in with a 3-2, which is a left hook to a straight right, and he lands a straight right, and he lands it hard. The same combination that he lands for the knockout later in the second round. So, and more importantly, it's a clean shot and a clean counter to the low kick. So that shows you that within the first minute, he's got his range and his timing. He's dialing it in. And it's going to get better as the fights go on. You can assume at that point that it will get better as the fights going on too, because that's what he's shown in the last 3 fights. So to bring up Usman versus Gilbert Burns again, a huge factor in that fight was Usman's ability to counter the low kick with the jab. We see that battle pretty often these days with one guy trying to land the jab and the other guy is trying to land the low kick. It's a good battle back and forth to establish who's going to be asserting their game plan. And so sometimes we see one guy is able to, like Usman, is able to use his great jab to take advantage of the low kick and counter the low kick, or other times we'll see fighters able to counter the jab by timing the jab and landing the low kick as they step forward. So in this case, that's how Kamaru Usman was able to hurt Gilbert Burns, and that's what we're starting to see he's able to do here with Masvidal. And it's because when you throw your opponent throws a kick naked, or your opponent throws a kick without setting it up with their hands first or with another technique first, Usman is able to read that and counter it effectively. So going back to the fight, immediately after Kamaru Usman lands that straight right hand, my favorite moment of the fight outside of the knockout plays out here. So let's walk through it. We get to 403. Masvidal throws the naked low kick, and Usman checks the kick, lands a 3-2 counter, and as Usman steps in, Masvidal looks for a check left hook counter, but he's hit by Usman's right before his own hook can land. After that, Usman resets the distance, he steps in with a jab and immediately changes levels and fakes a shot. Then he resets the distance again, steps in with a jab into a right hook to the body. So when you go back and watch this fight, I mean, just start at 403 and watch this sequence a few times. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's really the entire fight summed up in just a few seconds too. We see Usman countering after the naked low kick. Then we see the straight right landing as Masvidal looks for a check hook. And then we see Usman jabbing and level changing and faking a shot, all within the span of a few seconds. And even at the top level for Masvidal, he's got 50 fights under his belt. This is highly complex striking to keep up with. Usman is using his feints to freeze Masvidal. He's making him hesitate, and he's dialing in his counters for the attacks that Masvidal is willing to lead with. And then he's giving Masvidal multiple looks out of the same entrance. And this comes back to that jab step, because when Usman jab steps, it's anyone's guess if he's actually going to step in with that jab up top, or if he's going to step in with a takedown, or if he's going to jab into a straight right. He's multiple steps ahead on multiple levels. And I mean, just try to wrap your mind around that, how much that is to keep track of. And that's really effective feinting summed up. You show one entrance with multiple paths out of it, and you better be well prepared to deal with what's coming. And so there's a lot of great strikes that land in this fight, like the one at 403. But outside of that, the best part of this fight to me is really just watching how Usman moves around the cage between these striking exchanges, because his footwork has gotten so good in the span of just 4 fights alone. And when you watch this fight back, if you go from 4 minutes all the way down to 2 minutes and 45 seconds of that first round, if you don't pay attention to anything else and just focus solely on Usman's footwork, there is a gold mine of stuff to take away from it. Right? We've already talked about the jab step at length, and I just can't get enough of it. But another note about the jab step is that he stands slightly out of range as he's doing this too. And that's the key to an effective jab step. And if you look at another fighter under Trevor Whitman, who's Usman's coach, Rose Namajunas, and she won the strawweight title right before this, right? And she also uses the jab step very well. And a key to that is standing slightly out of range, jab stepping in, and that's how you get your opponent to commit on a counter and whiff. So back to Usman's footwork, after he jab steps, he circles away and he changes direction. And he's changing direction constantly, rotating left or rotating right, jab steps again, takes a short step off to the right, jab steps again, moves back left. His movement is constant and it's always changing. He's not really repeating the same patterns over and over again. He has multiple different ways to change his direction and change the angle of attack that he's entering on. And as Usman is moving around, you'll notice that Masvidal has to follow him around, and Masvidal constantly has to turn to face him. So even though Masvidal has control of the center of the cage, he's constantly turning to face Usman, and that's how you know that Usman is leading the dance. He's controlling the distance and the angles with his footwork first, and then he steps in with his attack. And that's how you start exchanges on your terms. That's how you start exchanges with advantages on your side, because at this level, and it really can't be stressed enough, the margin for error is so small in a championship level fight, and in the UFC in general, the margin for error is minuscule. So the slightest advantage in range or angle, that means everything. So when we get down to 245, that's, almost a minute and a half of Usman just moving around, and we see them exchange a little bit. They trade, some poking shots back and forth, but Usman, he's just laying this groundwork of feints and of footwork that he's going to be building off as the fight goes on. And his training partner, Justin Gaethje, he always stresses Usman gets better as the fight goes on, and it's because he's always setting up the next thing with his movement. So I really love the way that Usman's footwork has developed, because it looks like his striking has gotten significantly better, and that starts with the feet. It always starts with your footwork. You can have all the punching power in the world, but if you can't maneuver your opponent to where you want them to be in the cage, then that power goes to waste. So anyways, we get back down to 245, and we see Masvidal jump in with a flying knee. Usman covers up, he grabs the body lock, and then he lands a takedown there and starts working his top game. So all the level changes up to this point, and Usman didn't even need to shoot in for the takedown. Masvidal closed the distance for him because, to me, it seemed like he was getting a little bit impatient. He wanted to land something damaging, and it's about 245 of the round, so you're thinking about things you can do to win the round. So he has to jump in with a big strike. He goes for the flying knee, and Usman opportunistically just grabs a hold and takes him down. And that's as ideal as it gets for Usman, because now he gets to start working his top control. He gets about a minute of top control to land some shots, and Masvidal is able to get up. But on top of that, the threat of the takedown is now real. He's been taken down and he's been put on his back. So now when these level change feints come through again, he's going to be thinking more about, I don't want to be on my back. Now, that being said, Masvidal scrambles really nicely. And, he finds himself in a couple bad positions after Usman lands a takedown. Usman's able to start off in side control. Usman's able to get his back, but Masvidal is getting himself out of these bad positions. So you can tell that he was really well prepared for these grappling exchanges. But he still doesn't want to be on his back or against the cage for the next 4 rounds either. So he's going to be a little bit more on alert for these takedowns. So they get up, they break from the clinch, and then when after that, Usman lands a hard straight right at 54 seconds. So that's just a beautiful shot, and not a lot to say about it. It's Usman kind of just lands his lead straight right. But the thing I do want to add here is that when you lead with a straight right hand, or if you're leading with a straight left hand from southpaw, your ability to land that is improved significantly by throwing that as your opponent is stepping forward, as Masvidal was at 54 seconds. So we sometimes see fighters, they want to lead off exchanges with their straight right or with their straight left while they're moving forward and backing their opponent up, but it's not nearly as effective as when you are stepping backwards and you're stepping out of range and pulling your opponent into range, and then stepping forward with your straight right or left as your opponent is stepping in, and you catch them mid-step. And that's a concept that I would like to look at in depth in the future. I'm going to be doing a film study on Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey, and that fight is just littered with good examples of that concept. So we'll get to that one day. I don't want to get too sidetracked here, right? So we see Usman lead with that straight right at 54 seconds. Then immediately after, Masvidal gets hit by the straight right. Then he looks for a naked low kick. And if you're going to be fighting Kamaru Usman in the future, I think you need to pause the fight right there and print out a picture of Usman landing a hard jab as Masvidal is looking for this naked low kick. And I mean, go further. If you're going to fight Usman, before you go to bed, you should write down on a chalkboard 100 times, I will not throw naked leg kicks against Kamaru Usman. This is now one of the most dangerous things you can do against Kamaru Usman. And I'll hammer that point home until the day I die, because Gilbert Burns made that mistake and he got hurt bad and he got finished. And now we see Masvidal, he's throwing naked low kicks and he's eating hard jabs. And in the next fight, if Colby Covington comes in and he starts throwing these naked low kicks and naked body kicks, you can bet the house that Usman is going to find a home for that jab. So, like I said, it's now one of the most dangerous things you can do against Usman. He's waiting for you to do it, and so that he can take advantage of it. And if you step in with a kick without any setup, in this fight, after Usman has had 4 minutes to dial in his jab, his distance, his timing, you're only going to see bad results. And that brings me to the next point. If you want to attack Kamaru Usman's legs, you have to set up the kicks. Otherwise, he'll jab your face off, right? It's that simple. If you want to attack his legs, you have to occupy his hands up top first so that he cannot land that jab. And you look at how sharp his jab has gotten, not just in terms of speed and technique. He's throwing with power. It's a piston of a left hand that he's got now. So, man, I could just go off on a tangent all day about Kamaru Usman's jab now. But anyways, moving on to finish out the round, Usman gets a little bit overzealous. Now he's landed some good shots and he starts stepping in with these big overhand punches, and he does shift forward with it. But I remember I was watching the fight and I was kind of saying to myself, I was like, you don't really need to be doing that right now. Like, you're landing the hard shots without, looping your punches. So just get rid of that and just stick to the straight shots. Now, me personally, I like seeing straight shots over hooks all day in fighters. I love, because straight shots are always going to beat hooks, right? I mean, if you time it properly. But, going from point A to point B in a straight line is always going to be faster than going from point A to point C to point B in like a loop, right? So I prefer to see straight punching over hooks. That being said, I do love people that throw hooks, but I like when fighters tend to use straight shots dominantly in their arsenal. Now, Usman said after the fight that between rounds, his coach Trevor Whitman was kind of stressing stick to the fundamentals, and I take that to mean what I was saying, like stick to the straight shots, don't go crazy with the power shots. And when you watch Whitman corner his fighters, he's always reminding his fighters to stay sharp. And I really do love listening to Trevor Whitman's corner advice, because it's always short, it's sweet, it's technical. and he always kind of reins his fighter back in. And so he gives really, really good corner advice. And that you would think that's, a common thing, but you when you start paying attention to different fighters' corners, you can kind of pick out that sometimes corners are just saying like, hey, like move your head, or like, hey, just you need to land this and that, but they're not really giving good advice on how to do those things. And so Trevor Whitman always gives like short, sweet tidbits for his fighter to, you know, get them into the fight and keep improving as the fight goes on. So that's something I appreciate about Usman's coach. Now, in the last few seconds of the first round, Usman steps in with a jab, and Masvidal again looks for the check left hook to counter. So if you've been paying attention to Jorge Masvidal up to this point, you'll notice that he spent most of the first round looking to counter. And specifically, he's looking to land the check left hook counter. And we see him go to the check left hook in almost every exchange in the first round. Not just the exchanges, but also as a reaction to Usman's feints. Now, we talked about how Usman feints were effective in controlling the distance and creating different looks, but most importantly, his feints allowed him to collect data on how Masvidal is going to respond. So Usman jab steps, Masvidal looks for a check left hook. Usman level changes, Masvidal looks for a check left hook. Usman leads with a straight right, Masvidal looks for a check left hook. It was constant. And one of Masvidal's greatest strengths is usually his ability to diversify his striking. He lands elbows in the clinch. He follows his body kicks with punches. He leads exchanges with head kicks. He's got a great flying knee. And yet, a lot of that was missing in the first round. And that's because Usman was the one leading the exchanges. And as Masvidal was no longer the aggressor, the variety in his arsenal started to fade away. And it kind of all was reduced back to just that check left hook counter. And that's what effective feinting, that's the impact that effective feinting has, right? So round ends and Masvidal has been looking for the same punch all round. You have to be thinking Usman's picked up on that. And there's no doubt in my mind that he did, because that's the reason he's feinting. He wants to see what you're going to do when he feints. So the round ends, and we go back to our corners, and the audio is in Masvidal's corner. And I kind of found this interesting, that despite he lost that first round, and he was actually getting outstruck in that first round, but all of the corner advice was focused on the wrestling. And the wrestling was only about like a minute and a half in that round, but all the advice was like whizzer against the fence. So avoid giving up your back. Try to find the wall. If you get taken down, try to find the wall, the cage, and wall walk up. So I think that really does speak to the approach that Masvidal's camp took to this fight. They're just almost all in on these grappling exchanges, and it shows how much of an impact the first fight had on the planning process going into this rematch. And rightfully so, because Usman dominated the grappling exchanges in that first fight, and they really didn't want that to happen again. Now, I'm not saying that Masvidal received bad corner advice. I'm just saying that it's interesting how much of a focus there was on the grappling, when you can see that the striking was playing a significant role in that first round. And so I think for future opponents, if you see Usman starting to find success with that jab early on, you really need to be sounding the alarm, and you need to be making adjustments on the feet immediately, because as we've seen, it's only going to get worse from there. So we get to round two. Round two starts, and the first minute, not a lot of action at first glance, but what are we paying attention to, right? We're looking at the footwork. So Usman's right back to his feints. He's still level changing. He's still continuing to build. And I just, again, really pay attention to how he's moving. How he's stepping off on these short steps to the left and right, and he's moving his head. He's kind of like bobbing and weaving his head as he's moving, and he's rotating one way, changing direction, rotating the other way. After he's done rotating, he jab step. He's just always a moving target. So Really, really, really want to stress how good his footwork is here. And we get to 4 minutes and 10 seconds of the second round. Now, Masvidal, he leads off that exchange with an overhand right. That looks good. He's starting to lead again. Usman covers up and tries to counter back with a right hook of his own. And after Usman counters, you want to pay attention to what Masvidal's left hand does there. And if you notice what he's looking for, it's a check left hook. And then a few seconds later, at 4:07, Usman steps in with a jab. Masvidal is able to land a counter punch, a counter check left hook. So he finally finds a home for it. And then we get to the final exchange of the fight, 4 minutes and 1 second, about 6 seconds later. And Usman steps in with a 3-2 combination, a left hook to a straight right. And he lands a straight right. Masvidal goes down, and he's out before he hits the ground. And again, you want to be watching Masvidal's left hand there. He's looking for the check left hook. So this is what I love about watching fight film. When you're watching a fight live, you see the incredible knockout punch, and you see it's just an incredible moment when you're watching live. But when you go back and you rewatch the fight and you kind of deconstruct the fight and you look at the way that Usman was able to build up to that knockout punch from the first round, that's where you see the real beauty of this sport. It's not just the right hand. It's the footwork to control the distance. It's the level changes to keep the threat of the takedown constant. It's the feints that he used to draw out Masvidal's counters. And it's how he adds all that information together to land the knockout punch in the end. So by the time that he threw that final combination, he knew exactly what Masvidal was looking for to counter. Picture perfect knockouts like this one, they don't happen by accident and they don't happen randomly. This was a methodical game plan and it was executed to perfection. And that's what you're up against. If you want to be champion at 170, if you want to beat Kamaru Usman, you need to look at this fight, and that's what you need to take away from it. After the fight, Masvidal, he went on the Helwani show Monday morning, and he was saying, he was walking through that final exchange, and he was talking about how he was actually expecting Usman to shoot for a takedown in that final exchange. And by the time that he realized what was going on, he had already thrown the check left, and it was too late, and the punch landed, and then he went out. Even Masvidal, he was saying that, like, he said specifically, like, I'm a fan of that moment because of just how well set up it was. And I mean, when you break it down and you take it apart, I mean, the amount of work that went into that final moment, it's all there. It's very clear what happened there. And so it's just really, really cool to see how Usman was able to arrive there. But it's important to take away what Masvidal was thinking in that final exchange, and how he saw Usman stepping in, and because of the feints that were set up in that first round, he read it and he reacted wrong. And that's what effective feinting does. So it's always kind of interesting when you have a rematch where the first fight wasn't exactly close. Now, that gave Masvidal a lot to work on, right? He came in and he addressed the obvious problem. Now, the fight ended before we could see, really what impact the wrestling would have in the later rounds. But to me, it seemed like he addressed the obvious problem, which was the grappling exchanges. And he came in with a better gas tank, and it seemed that he was ready to go 5 rounds of hard grappling. He came in ready to fight out of the takedowns and the clinch. But I think that had some diminishing returns because he was so prepared for the grappling that caused him to kind of be a little more hesitant with his striking. And like I said, when you keep your hips back as you're striking, yeah, you keep your hips in a better position to fight off the takedown, but you also don't have the type of power that you need when you're throwing your strikes. So it's a really noticeable difference in the way that Masvidal is punching. Watch the first fight, just the first round of the Masvidal Usman fight, and then watch the first round of this fight, and just look at Masvidal's punching specifically, and you'll notice a very large difference in the power in his swing. And so for Usman, he came in and he built off the first fight, and what a great game plan, right? Like his camp, from what I can tell, they were thinking another step ahead. And it appears to me that they were well aware that Masvidal would come into this rematch ready to grapple. And so they built a game plan on top of that, ready to take advantage of that concept. So instead of grappling right off the bat like he did in the first fight, they went, what if we can just make him think about grappling? What if we can make him think that we're going to shoot? So you fake the takedowns and then you get him hesitating. And that will create opportunities to land your shots up top. Brilliant stuff. And I have no doubt that's how Trevor Whitman approached this fight. And on that night at UFC 261, Trevor Whitman had 2 fighters in 2 championship fights, and both of them got finishes. The results speak for themselves. So what can you do against Usman going forward? I mean, oh, man, what are your options if you're going to fight him? And so I do still think that attacking his legs, I think that is a viable option, but only if you set up the kicks first. We have countless examples now of Usman taking advantage of naked low kicks. So if you don't set up the kicks, you will eat jabs or you will get taken down. Now, how do you deal with the feints? How do you deal with effective feints? And this is a tough one because we're seeing fighters are getting better at feinting now. The sport is evolving and it's adding in this new layer with really solid feinting. So what can you do? Well, for one thing, you can feint back at him. Right? A good rule of thumb in sports in general is like, if you don't like what your opponent is doing to you, try doing it back to them. See how they like it and see how they react to it. So can you turn Usman's game on him? Can you get him hesitating? Can you get him missing and throwing strikes from out of range? That's what I would be looking to do. Or kind of a funny thing is you could just not react to the feints at all. It's kind of a weird concept, but if you look back at the Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero fight, Israel Adesanya, he's another really, really good feinting. But if you watch that fight, you see Izzy, he's jab stepping, he's showing kick feints, he's showing hip thrusts, he's showing all kinds of feints, and Romero literally just doesn't flinch. He doesn't react to any of them. He just ignores them entirely. And then he just ignored every feint and then waited for Izzy to step into range. After Izzy would feint, then he would step in to land a strike. And then Romero would just not react. And then Izzy got close enough and he would throw a massive hook. And so that's one way to go about it. And you can compare that fight to Izzy's next fight with Paulo Costa. And you see how Costa reacted to every single feint too, right? So if you can find a way to just not pay any attention to the feints, if you're just ignorant to them, you might find some success. Now, all that being said, you have to address the wrestling problem as well, and you can't get around that, because if you can't give Kamaru Usman a reason to fear taking you down, then you're always going to be at a massive disadvantage. That's what I was talking about with the ability to control where the fight takes place, because Usman always has the wrestling that's in his back pocket, and if things start to look bad on the feet, he can get you against the clinch, get you against the fence and work the clinch, or he could take you down and just work his top game. Now, if he takes you down, you need to have a dangerous submission game off your back. And that was an interesting point in the Gilbert Burns Kamaru Usman fight, because there were a few times where Gilbert Burns ended up on his back and Usman did not go down into his guard and try to work his top game. He let Gilbert Burns get up. So you have to be thinking, Usman, he's happy to take you down unless you happen to be a jiu-jitsu world champion. Now, if you're Gilbert Burns, he had a very good skill set for taking on Kamaru Usman. He had great knockout power. He had some really nice Muay Thai. He had that, world championship level jiu-jitsu in his back pocket too. But again, naked low kicks had a big impact on that fight, right? So after this fight, Kamaru now stands as the pound for pound #1 fighter in the world. and I think you'll have a hard time finding anyone to disagree with that. So that's our main event for today, and I hope you enjoyed the round-by-round breakdown. We do have some fights going on this weekend. On Saturday, May 1st, we have UFC Fight Night, Reyes versus Prochazka, and that's a light heavyweight main event. So this is looking like a pretty nice card. We've also got on the undercard Kai Kamaka III. He's fighting. On the main card, we have Merab Dvalishvili. He's fighting Cody Stamann, which is going to be a fun one. And then there's just a few solid contenders on this card. Cub Swanson, he's coming back. I think he'll be in the co-main event. So I'm looking forward to this fight card this week, and there should be some good fights there. And we'll be back next week. I'm not sure what we'll talk about yet, but depending on how this fight card this weekend shakes out, we'll might take a look at one of the fights there, or maybe we'll look at a TJ Dillashaw fight so that I can properly cope with the sadness of losing that fight, which was supposed to take place the weekend after this coming weekend. So we'll see. A few options there. If you want to keep up with me during the week, you can follow me on Twitter at FightsWeLove. I'm also on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple and Google Podcasts. Once again, I am Alex O, and I truly appreciate you tuning in. So enjoy the fights this weekend, and join me next week, and we'll talk about the fights we love. Thank you for listening.